The playoff bracket is set. The New York Mets and the Atlanta Braves are both going to the playoffs in 2024 after a wild doubleheader on Monday. Joe and I are going to break down the matchups coming up in the wild card round and who we think is going to win those matchups. And then we'll talk about the keys to certain teams for the MLB playoffs in 2024. But first, we have to introduce you to episode 1 of the MLB Mojo podcast, the Ozzie Smith episode. And I am here with Joe. Joe, how are you?
Damn, we're going like big throwbacks on the episode numbers, who they are and everything. I am feeling good. It was a kind of a sad day as, you know, D-backs dojo does not get to continue this year, as the Diamondbacks definitely feel like they got the short end of the stick with that doubleheader situation. Obviously, the Diamondbacks needed one of the teams to sweep that doubleheader on Monday, but we all knew as soon as whoever won the first game, that second game was not going to be nearly as competitive. And truth be told, that first game, that's like peak game 163. That is what postseason baseball is built on. I'm sad that I did not get to watch hardly any of it because I was working, but damn, that certain, like all the Met fans out there that just got to watch that roller coaster and end up winning that game, clinching their playoff berth, absolutely huge for them. Gut wrenching for the Diamondbacks in the second game, but Braves fans everywhere, rejoice. You're in the playoffs for, I think they said, the 7th straight year. They, Colton, are heading to face the San Diego Padres, the wild card one out of the National League. And the Padres, surprised us both. I think we both had them missing the playoffs in our, I guess, like preseason predictions that we did over on Mariner Mojo, which most of you guys probably know us from. But the Padres, they won, 92 games?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely bananas from them. And this game one matchup, I think for both the Braves and the Mets, like the teams that they're going to face have to feel good, I think, about their chances, at least in game one. I mean, nobody's safe in the playoffs. I think last year kind of proved that. I think every year you get a team that's kind of a dark horse that makes a great run through it, that nobody's really truly safe in the postseason. But I think if you're the Padres and you're the Brewers, you have to feel pretty good about your chances, at least in game one, because the Mets and the Braves just finished playing a doubleheader, and we don't know like probable pitchers that are going to be announced realistically for either of those matchups right now. But if I had to guess, Colton, for Padres Braves game one, should Chris Sale's back spasms be healed, they just magically go away, it has to be him. National League Cy Young frontrunner, probably going in game one. If not him, Max Fried. Like, there's options for the Braves.
You feel good either way. They're both fantastic pitchers.
Proven, been there, done that kind of guys. For the Padres side, though, I don't really think Dylan Cease has made the postseason, has he? If not, like with the White Sox way back when, but he wasn't who he is now when he was on, like when the White Sox were actually a good competitive baseball team. And he should be getting the ball in game one for the Padres. Yeah. He's been, I think, every step of the way, like what they traded him to be, he was that for them in 2024.
Yeah, Dylan Cease is a guy that I think surprised me a little bit. I was kind of, there were talks back in the day of the Mariners trading for him last offseason, and I'm like Dylan Cease he's not that good. Like, he's like glorified Chris Flexen or something like that. Mm-hmm. Some crazy things coming out of my mouth back in 2023. And yeah, he became exactly what the Padres needed him to be. Obviously, they lost Blake Snell coming out of the 2023 season. They needed to go out there and find a bona fide ace, and they did that by going out and acquiring Dylan Cease. So him versus Sale in game one is something that, I mean, if Sale is able to go, that's cinema right there. Both teams are going to be absolute cinema. Both teams are going to be missing some key contributors to their lineups. Austin Riley for the Braves, I believe, will still be out. I think he's out for the entirety of the playoffs, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. And Ha-Sung Kim is also out. So it's like, Kim had a down year for sure. But I mean, you look at the offense on both these teams. Obviously, the Braves haven't had Acuna all year, but guys have stepped up. I mean, Michael Harris Jr., after a rough start to the season, has stepped up. The second, not junior, right? I always mess that up, dude. It's every like single time.
Sure, it's like close enough.
It's the same thing.
It's like Gary Payton having a son named Gary Payton Jr. and Gary Payton II. You know what I mean? That's a real thing.
That's cheating. Gary Payton's wild. But yeah, the Braves, it wasn't the typical Braves offense that we've seen in years past. I mean, Sean Murphy hit like, I think, 194 on the year. You know, you didn't have, again, Ronald or Austin Riley out there. Ozzie Albies came through big at the beginning of game one of the Wildcard series. And then you look over at the Padres, and they're a team, in my opinion, that's firing on all cylinders. Manny Machado, Fernando Tatis has been great as well. You look at the moves they made at the All-Star or at the trade deadline to go out there and acquire guys at the back end of their bullpen. The Padres, in my opinion, are a team that is built to go deep into the playoffs. They're a team that I think is built, it's very well rounded. I think this is going to be an interesting matchup for sure. The Mets and the Brewers game, Joe. We're assuming it's going to be Luis Severino pitching for the New York Mets. He was going to go in game 2 of the doubleheader had the Mets lost game 1. And for the Milwaukee Brewers, we assume it'll be Freddie Peralta going in that game. A couple of power right-handed pitchers. How do you feel about that pitching matchup specifically? Because Severino's a guy who not many people would have put as like an ace type guy going into 2024, but he has been as close to that as you can be for the New York Mets.
Yeah, he put it all together, I'd say, of like what he was kind of brought in to do. Like he left the Yankees, goes to the Mets, puts up like an 11-7 record with a 3.91 ERA over 182 innings, strikes out 161 batters. Like there's definitely some rocky patches in there for him, but this season for him, I think it was kind of like a prove it year. And he should probably get the ball in game 1 for the Mets. I don't imagine they really have anybody else on that pitching staff that deserves it more than him. Opposite him, Freddie Peralta, a guy that, if I'm being honest with you, was kind of a letdown in 2024 by like, I think what everyone expected him to be. Like he finally gets the reins of that Brewers pitching, like the front of that pitching staff with Burns gone and Brandon Woodruff out. And the thing that stands out to me is just the walk rate. He just continued, his walks climbed. Last year was 2.9 walks per 9. This year was 3.5 walks per 9. It's not anything crazy, but it just felt like he wasn't as sharp the entire season. And him getting the ball in game 1, I know you're looking to, if you're the Brewers, the moment you smell trouble, you turn to your power bullpen. That's like the Brewers' strength. They obviously got Devin Williams in the back there with his airbender changeup, and you've got other guys in that pen that you can play around with. But I look at Freddie Peralta in this matchup, and I am worried about like just the command in general. Like a 3.68 ERA on the year is fine, but coming into the year, like I thought he was like sub 3, like sub 3.3, like type like area of pitcher, and it just didn't kind of come together for him this year. I will say Milwaukee as a team, like they do hit okay. 104 WRC plus on the year if you're going to like take a look at what they're going to do against Severino. And on the pitching side of things, they're top 5 in all of baseball in team ERA at 3.65. So I think with the Brewers, a team that we both slept on again. I think I had them at 500. They win the Central and they're dancing in the playoffs again. Kind of get to rub it in Council's face, division rival over there with Chicago. But this matchup, I'm not really like as excited for whatever reason. I'm more excited for the Padres-Braves matchup. The Padres, they went 16-8 in September. They were on fire. Batting champ Luis Ariz. I don't want to go back to them too much because we kind of moved past it, but if I'm looking at these two matchups, like coming out of the doubleheader, I'm much more interested to see how the Padres-Braves matchup goes versus the Mets and the Brewers. For whatever reason, I just think the Brewers take care of the Mets. I think, yes, the Mets, the Grimace Mets have had a great run, but I look at the Mets lineup, and I'm really looking at Lindor, Nimmo, Alonso as like the main pillars there of like what can they do, and sure it'll be like decent. I'm not saying like there are any slouches there, but I then take a look at the Brewers and like you've got some guys that maybe you didn't expect, but like William Contreras, another fantastic year, probably the best catcher in baseball, if not named Cal Raleigh, right? Bias aside here from some Mariners fans, but like Jackson Churio, great season. You look at Willie Adames, likely going to get paid big this offseason. You've got Rhys Hoskins with that postseason pedigree as well, being the DH there. Like there's more names in the Brewers lineup that I like as far as like going out and getting it done compared to the Mets for whatever reason. And I could be wrong in that assessment, but I look at that matchup and I'm like, okay, will the Mets really be able to, if they get down late, get a run off of Devin Williams, Trevor McGill, like if Joel Payamps is coming in there and throwing 99, like I for whatever reason, I'm giving the edge to the Brewers. but I don't know if that's necessarily like the savvy thing to do, given how the Mets kind of willed their way into the postseason. Like it was tough down the stretch, but they just played each other right before the Mets had to go play this doubleheader. Like they're familiar with each other, and the Brewers stomped them in the first two games, quite frankly. 8-4, 6-0, and then the Mets did win the final game 5-0 on Sunday, but at that point the Brewers didn't really have anything to play for.
I think that the big thing for both of these teams in the National League wildcard that did just play on Monday is, like you mentioned earlier, like they had to, because A, doubleheader, but B, because the games are so close, they really had to exhaust a lot of their resources in terms of guys in the bullpen, for example. And especially if Chris Sale can't go in game one for the Atlanta Braves, and that does leave you with Max Fried. Going into game two, Joe, for the National League wildcard games, we're looking at a matchup where you probably see, I would say, it's possible Reynaldo Lopez. They might just throw him out there. It's possible Charlie Morton is another guy. Obviously, Schwellenbach won't go, and assuming Chris Sale won't go, you don't have to worry about either of them. And then for the Padres, you're either looking at Yu Darvish or Joe Musgrove.
Maybe. I mean, Michael King had a great year. I could
True.
see a petition for him, but you probably do turn to your veterans there in Darvish or Musgrove. I agree with the assessment, but like Michael King did have a great year that he will start a game in the postseason for the Padres if they do end up making a deep run. How you're saying, like they're kind of built to go deep. Michael King will have I think a shining moment at some point during this postseason run.
Yeah, I mean the Padres, they just have a good enough rotation to be able to handle something like this. Like, whereas again with the Braves, where obviously they missed Spencer Strider all year, and if Chris Sale is having those back troubles, like they have a good rotation, but having to use Schwellenbach, they used him in game one, and then having to use Grant Holmes in game two, I guess. I mean, you're not going to have either of them, but Charlie Morton again is a veteran that I would not be shocked if they turn to him going into game two here. Reynaldo Lopez, if they are okay with throwing him out there, especially coming right off the IL, I kind of doubt it. I think Morton is probably the guy. I would expect to see, assuming that the Padres win game one, I would expect to see a Morton and a Darvish start in game two. Looking at the Mets and the Brewers is a little bit more interesting, in my opinion, because as to where teams go, the Mets, they have Sean Manaea is a guy who I think makes a lot of sense. So I think he started on Saturday or Sunday. And then the Brewers, they can go with Colin Ray, and Tobias Matthews, and I don't know, like where do you think that those two teams go in the wild card game two of that series?
I mentioned before we kind of like sat down, like Tobias Myers or Aaron Savali could be options. And I don't think either of them are really bad options. I would probably lean towards Aaron Savali. I mean, they acquired him to be a guy behind Freddie Peralta. Like that would be my guy that I would turn to realistically. Not to say that like Myers or Ray haven't like earned their keep in 2024, but, and I know Savali, it's the tale of like, he was with the Guardians, wasn't great, was with the Rays, wasn't like super great. Like, did the Brewers fix him? I'm not sold on it, but I think for whatever reason I turned to him in game two. But I could see an argument for any of the three. Honestly, it could be a combination of them as well. Like it doesn't have to be like every guy goes out there and gives you six. Like you can go 2-3 innings with a couple of them and kind of piece it all together. For the Mets, Manaea or Quintana are interesting. I didn't really consider them off for whatever reason because I know they'd started over the weekend against the Brewers, but I looked at David Peterson when I first kind of like was thinking about like
Who's
who
been
would
very
start.
good as well.
Yeah, he has been great. And maybe Manaea or Quintana get game one instead of Luis Severino. Like, I don't know. Realistically, like what the Mets will do, just given like their quick turnaround of playing a doubleheader, having to go then into Milwaukee. But Manaea, he's going to get paid this offseason for sure. Has showed up for the Mets when they needed him to. I guess my gut would be to say Sean Manaea in game two. And I mean, you look at his season on like as a whole, like a 3.47 ERA over 181 innings. Like this is his healthiest year by far outside of like since like 2021, where he just kind of, he put it all together, I'd say, in this season. We kind of like witnessed what Sean Manaea was kind of being advertised as early on in his Oakland days, where yeah, he pitched like 160-ish innings before, but never really like put it all together for like a true winning ball club like the Mets in 2024. And if there's anyone that is, I guess, like been there, done that, has earned his keep at 32 years old, making a playoff start. Like Sean Manaea, if he gets game 2, hell, I'm going back on my word. He might get game 1. But that'll be an interesting matchup, like nonetheless, of just like kind of how these teams attack each other. Because you mentioned it, they exhausted a lot of their resources. I mean, Edwin Diaz threw 39 or 40 pitches in that first game just to try and seal down the victory. He's not available in game 1.
He had thrown 29 pitches the day before, too.
Yeah, 69.
Nice. Also,
Nice.
not to interrupt you here, but Brian Snicker says that he does not expect Chris Sale to pitch in the Wildcard series.
That's tough.
So it sounds like it will be Max Fried game 1. I would assume.
Wow.
So yeah, so that is a tough loss for them. Obviously, the NL Cy Young favorite.
Mhm.
So that's a big loss for the Atlanta Braves, Joe. As for the American League side of things, in my opinion, these matchups are a lot more interesting.
I think they're more clear cut too.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. So the pitching matchup we'll start with here for game 1, Kansas City versus Baltimore. Obviously, it'll be Corbin Burns for Baltimore, and it'll be Cole Ragans for Kansas City. Two guys that have had incredible years, Joe. Obviously, Corbin Burns will be a free agent at the end of this season, so he's kind of already he's going to earn a bag. He will. And then Cole Ragans is a guy who is like a pitching ninja baby. Like, oh my goodness, like he's like his stuff is incredible, Joe. How do you feel about that series? Going to be in Camden, so so we don't get the cheating Royals. They don't get to play at home. How are we feeling about that series?
I do think that the Royals at Kauffman narrative definitely fell by the wayside in the like latter half of 2024. Like looking at their like home versus road splits and just like overall record, like they weren't that much different. They weren't that far off from each other by season's end. And I know that I'm playing it a little devil's advocate here, but at home they were 45-36. On the road they were 41-40. They pitched better on the road than they did at home, Colton. This Royals team had the second lowest team ERA playing as the away team. A 3.48, just 2 points behind, 0.02 points behind the Braves with a team ERA of 3.46. This Royals team, like, yeah, they were scuffling big time down the stretch, and that might be their demise. But if there's a team that I think has the, I guess, like wherewithal to come back from that struggle, realize where they were at, like where they were at last year, all the hard work that they put into this year, all the like praise that Bobby Witt Jr. had from this season, like all like just in general, like encompassing like what they did, and the pitching staff, the thing that they brought Seth Lugo in, Michael Wacha, and they revamped it. They went out and were aggressive at the deadline and got Lucas Erceg. This pitching staff, if they can go into Baltimore and slow down the Orioles lineup, which admittedly also they were scuffling towards the end of the season as well. These are two teams kind of coming in at a low that if one of them just pounces, they could see like a pretty like meteoric rise as far as like momentum is concerned in this series. Corbin Burns, Cole Ragans, a very, very good matchup. I mean, this is what Baltimore brought him in to be. He is their game 1 starter. He is their ace. It's unfortunate that they don't have some of the guys behind him that were previously on this roster. There's injury right now, like Kyle Bradish, but looking at this matchup specifically, I'm honest, like, not that I'm surprised that it's Cole Ragans versus instead of Seth Lugo, just given like what the makeup of each pitcher is. Because like Seth Lugo is a veteran, and I could see if they do lose game 1, turning to him in game 2 to really be a stopper and like rising to the occasion in that way, I think is a good like mental state for them to be in. Because like he's gonna go out there and regardless if they lose game 1, he has to go out and pitch game 2. Like he's a savvy veteran. I think he's going to be able to go out there and kind of hold on to whatever semblance of their season is hanging in the balance versus Baltimore. But again, there's no easy pitching matchups once you're in the postseason. Cole Ragans versus Corbin Burns, like that could very well be 7 innings of no hit ball from either side with 12 strikeouts for each team. You know what I mean?
And I look at the bullpen for some of these teams, like you mentioned, and it's like, I think the Royals have the advantage there. Obviously, like Yennier Cano is still a guy at the back end of the Orioles bullpen, but they have lost a lot of games in the late innings so far this year. Obviously, they did just get rid of Craig Kimbrell.
Yeah.
Was another thing that just happened. So for the Orioles, in my opinion, they're going to really have to rely on their offense throughout the entirety of the postseason because their pitching staff, I don't have a whole lot of faith in, especially as you get into the big games in October. But their offense is good enough where if they can get hot at the right time, they can carry them deep, just kind of like the Rangers offense did last year. Obviously, my pick was the Royals to win the World Series, or they were like my sleeper pick.
Yeah.
Yours, Joe, happened to be the Detroit Tigers, who are also making their way down to Houston to play the Astros in Wildcard Game 1. Really fun pitching matchup here with Framber on the mound for the Astros and Tarek Skubal, AL Cy Young favorite, on the mound for the Detroit Tigers. Tigers kind of a feel-good story there at the end of the season, whereas the Astros started the year slow and were able to come back out on top. Obviously, the Mariners had that 10-game lead. I refuse to see it. And yeah, I think that when it comes down to it, the Astros are the team that, they've been there, they've done that. This is nothing new for them. And maybe having to play in a wild card series, they're not really used to that.
Sure.
But the fact that I look at the Astros in this series specifically, and it's like they know how to win big games when it counts, whereas the Tigers are a young, very good, but still young ball club with a lot of guys with inexperience, but they were also carried by guys like Parker Meadows and Kerry Carpenter and, of course, Tarek Skubal, who went out there and had a year that I think many people, including yourself, thought he had in him.
Mm-hmm.
And this pitching matchup is one where I look at it and I say, if there's any game that I'm watching on Tuesday, any wild card game, this is the game I'm watching.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the 4 pitchers going for the AL, I think likely all 4 of them are going to be like probably top 4 in Cy Young vote getting, outside of maybe like Emmanuel Clase and like if you want to include Logan Gilbert, right? Like Framber had a great year. Cole Reagans had an amazing year. And then you look at like the other team, like Tariq Skubal, he's going to win the Cy Young, right? And then Burns was like, I'd say a lot of people's favorite outside of Skubal coming into the season. But I look at this Tigers team and it's probably the most intense environment that they could have gone to as far as their first playoff kind of like atmosphere. It's they've given the Angels the longest playoff drought in active baseball, like in the active MLB, right? Like Detroit, it's been a minute since they've been to the postseason. This is a young team. It was a big season out of Riley Green, which I was kind of like high on. You mentioned how I was high on Skubal. Torkelson did not have the year that I anticipated, but he's back with the club now. Hopefully, maybe he can get hot. I look at this team that went 34-19 over the last 2 months with just riding high, being managed by former Houston Astros manager AJ Hinch, who, yes, it's a bad, like it leaves a bad taste in our mouths as Mariners fans, but that's a guy who's been there. That's a guy who knows how to lead a team to victory and knows how to manage a postseason game with the best of them, right? This Tigers team is unconventional in many ways. The game 2 situation after you throw Skubal is, I'm not going to be surprised if they do a random bullpen day, because they were very successful in deploying that throughout this season. It's going to be Tyler Holton probably to open the game, would be my guess, in game 2 if that's the direction that they take it, and then they'll kind of fill it out after that, and they've got hyper prospect Jackson Jobe up. Like, this Tigers team, yes, it's a very hostile environment they're walking into Minute Maid Park. But if there's a team that can carry their momentum that they had throughout August into September into the postseason, yes, they did just lose a series to the Chicago White Sox at the end of the regular season, which not many teams did in 2024. But this Tigers team has the chance to be that Cinderella darling, to be special. And I hope that maybe they're not recognizing that too early. And like, if that makes sense, like they're like, it's almost like insisting upon itself. They're becoming self-aware that they're the darling Cinderella team for 2024. You know what I mean? Like, they're the ones that like no one expected to be here. Like it's a year too early. And then they're like, yeah, we're here. And then they get ahead of themselves, because this Houston team, like you said, ALCS, you just typically pencil in Houston's name because they're them. They have the tools to get there. It's under new management. Joe Espada, in his first year, after a very rough start, brought this Houston team to another AL West Division title. You look at how their pitching developed throughout the season. It was injuries at the beginning of the year, not pitching well in general. Look at Hunter Brown, who's likely to start the second game, would be my guess. Had a terrible start to his beginning of the year. And then now he's probably going to get game 2, and it's like he could get, I'm not going to say like top 10 Cy Young votes, but like there's going to be people talking like, yeah, he had a great second season for Houston. And the bullpen, we know the three-headed monster of Abreu to Presley to Hader. That's what they brought Hader in for at $19 million a year, is to be the closer at the back end of games. He has gone more than 3 outs a couple times, shockingly enough. But if it's going to, you know, he's the guy at the back end of that pen that you get the ball to him with a lead, that game is likely over, specifically in playoff situations like this where the levity of the situation is all that much higher. Like the gravity, it'll be palpable, especially with him on the mound chucking 99 at you from a sidewinder, like little cork action. This Tigers team, they might be above their pay grade, but again, if there's a Cinderella team, it's the Tigers for sure.
Mm-hmm. I think that the other interesting part in game 2, you mentioned how it's probably Hunter Brown. It'd be interesting as well if they do decide maybe they go to Justin Verlander, who's been awful, mind you, recently. But he has the pedigree, and he's pitching against the Tigers, his former team. Like, I think that's interesting. For the Tigers, you mentioned just another option they could do other than having a bullpen day is go to like Casey Mize or Keter Montero or Reese Olson.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily know who would line up there specifically, but some interesting names there if they do decide to not do a bullpen day. Overall, this is a series where, again, I feel like the Astros, like you said, the Tigers are the Cinderella team, but the Astros have the pedigree, and they're at home. The Astros are so used to winning big games in that stupid ballpark down there that this is nothing new to them. Overall, in the American League, I look to Wildcard Game 2 between the Orioles and who? The Orioles and who? What am I doing? Royals. The Orioles and Royals.
Yeah, your team.
Well, it just Royal. It rolls off the tongue weird.
Royal. Yeah.
Royal. Okay. So where do you think pitching matchup wise they go in game 2 if it's not Seth Lugo?
No,
and
it's got to be Seth Lugo.
You think it's got to be Seth Lugo? Because
who were you gonna say?
Brady Singer?
Nah. Seth Lugo
sure?
and Cole Reagans just put up like 2 of the best pitching seasons for the Royals in like the 21st century outside of Zach Greinke. Like Lugo will get Cy Young votes as well. Like he was that good for them. I'm not saying that maybe Singer doesn't deserve like his cup of coffee in the playoffs if they should get there, but I'm pretty sure on MLB.com, Royals like probable starters, it is listed Reagans, Lugo, Waka. If it goes to game 3, like they've got that lined up as far as the Royals series is concerned. I honestly think like, nah, they wouldn't deploy Singer in like a late game situation. Like,
but they could use him as like a long relief spot if they needed to.
Yeah,
as well.
if they wanted to. I don't know. Like, again, it was a great season for Brady Singer. I think adding those pieces around him really helped elevate his game, took some of the weight off of his shoulders, and that's part of the big success for the Royals this season. I think as far as like it's weird to say that like the pitching matchups favor the Royals because we're so used to their pitching being like their problem. Like just a year ago, they rolled out freaking I can't even remember his name right now. The guy that led the league in losses, and they just kept rolling him out like every 5th day for whatever reason. I can't remember his name right now. It's not Alec Marsh, but that's the name that popped into my head. But this team has completely shifted the narrative on how their pitching looks. And unfortunately for the Orioles, the narrative around their pitching hasn't, because the injury bugs we talked about. I mentioned Kyle Bradish, Grayson Rodriguez also likely to not. I don't think he'll be able to pitch in the postseason. I think he's listed as like he's done. So game 2, I mean, it's a deadline acquisition. Zach Eflin, a pretty now looming large deadline acquisition, is like, okay, what is Zach Eflin going to give you in game 2? Like, I imagine it goes to him out ahead of Cade Povich, Albert Suarez, Dean Kramer. Yeah, they're not going to turn to those guys in game 2, especially if they lose game 1. But if they're up, either way, I think Zach Eflin gives the Orioles the best chance to win game 2, especially pitching at home. You're going to have to look for Adley to turn around his season. Like, he definitely is having a down year compared to what people expected him to. Gunnar Henderson, I mean, it was a great season, but we weren't seeing his highlights as much pop up on the timeline nearly as we were at the beginning of the year. You're going to need a lot of those young guys who haven't really been in those situations to step up. You're looking at Jordan Westberg. You're looking at Colton Cowser, Jackson Holiday. If he's going to be seeing big innings, you're going to need them to not be, I guess, scared of the big moment. The lights can't be too bright for the young Orioles offensive like position players, just because they helped you carry a lot of this season. And sure, you've got some veterans on that roster. Like you look at Tony Taters, you look at Anthony Santander as a guy who he could go nuclear and hit 4 home runs in a 2-game span and just like go crazy. Like he has that within him. It's just a matter of will the Royals pitching staff allow that, because they've been great all year long. It'll be a challenging series for I really think the Orioles have their work cut out for them in this one. Like it's going to be a tough go in Camden.
I really hope that the ALCS is Royals Tigers.
Could you imagine?
And then just you and me are just at each other's throats for a week. You know what I mean? The winner of the Royals series will go on to play the New York Yankees, the number 1 seed in the American League. The winners of Houston and Detroit will go on to face the Guardians, the number 2 seed. The winners of the Mets and Brewers will go on to face the Philadelphia Phillies. They're the 2 seed in the NL. And the winners of the Braves and the Padres will go on to face the Dodgers, which is obviously the number 1 seed. Joe, if you had to pick one team right now that runs the table throughout most of this postseason, who is it?
I said on a stream like who my pick is. Like we picked both sides. The Padres are my team in the National League. I think that they have a chance to make a deep run here. And I think I said the Guardians as well. Stephen Vogt in his first year. For whatever reason, that team, they can just do it all. Every facet of the game they do well. And they've got, I mean, it's hard when you've got, I think they had 4 pitchers in their bullpen have ERAs below 2 this year. Clase, Gaddis are the 2 names that jump out of my head right now. I can't think of the other 2 off the top. But, I mean, it's Emmanuel Clase. Dude had the best reliever season since a Mo season, since maybe Eric Gagne in 03. Like, dude was electric. I would pick the Padres and Guardians to go all the way on either side. I will say a quick little backtrack for the Tigers series. Jordan's a 50-50 right now. He might not play in this wildcard series. It hasn't been confirmed whether or not he will be on the roster for this wildcard series. I'm sure by the time you guys are hearing this, that will have been announced. But Jordan missing this wildcard series could pay dividends for the Tigers if they don't have to deal with him. I'm sure the Astros still have Altuve, Bregman, Tucker, Yainer Diaz. Like they'll probably get a big moment out of Jason Hayward. That's just how that works. There's going to be some
nothing ever goes wrong for that ball club.
Yeah, sure, naturally, right? But Jordan, that's a big bat to miss because you and I have seen what can happen in Minute Maid with Jordan up at the bat. Okay, we've seen it.
One of the best pure hitters in all of baseball. For me, I go with the Phillies in the National League. I know it's kind of the obvious pick here. I mean, I think the Dodgers are probably the obvious pick, but the Phillies, I just love the fact their owner, man. It does it for me. He wants to win, and that's all I need. And I think the Phillies are just fun. We've seen a lot of guys like Bryce Harper's really fun on that team, of course. I mean, Kyle Schwarber leading off for them has been so much fun this year. I think he set the record for home runs by a leadoff hitter, right? Or leadoff home runs or something like that in 2024. And then in the American League, man, it's my Royals, baby. It's all about the Royals. Go Royals.
Just drinking that Kool-Aid.
I'm drinking that Kool-Aid, man. The Royals Phillies World Series is going to go hard in 2024, Joe. In the end, I think it'd be the Phillies. I mean, when you have a guy like Zach Wheeler at the front end of your rotation, you know what I mean? And they've gotten a lot of contributions out of a lot of guys. Obviously, they added Carlos Estevez as well at the back end of that bullpen. Matt Strom's been pretty decent for them. And then their offense is one that I just don't know, other than the Dodgers, who can really match up with the Phillies offense in the playoffs this year. The most fun matchup I can see, though, like coming up anytime soon, would be the Astros and Yankees. I think that's just a fun one.
Yeah, if it goes to ALCS, yeah.
Right, because like obviously we remember during the 2017 series the scandals of Aroldis Chapman giving up the home run to Jose Altuve, so that'd be a lot of fun. If the Dodgers end up facing the San Diego Padres in the NLDS, that's a lot of fun because those are two teams that have a lot of bad blood recently. Obviously, the Padres were trying to take the division away from the Dodgers. I think that's a really fun series. And it'll be interesting to see Shohei in his first postseason appearance. You know what I mean? I think it'll be fun to see what he could do on the biggest stage. But that's going to do it from us here on episode 1 of the MLB Mojo podcast. The Playoffs are going to get pretty wild starting up on Tuesday. It's going to be a lot of fun. Hope you guys will stick with us. We appreciate you guys watching this one, and we'll see you soon.